What would you do if you discovered that the quaint small town you've chosen to call home harbored a century-old secret so disturbing that it continues to claim victims to this day? Have you ever wondered what dark histories lie hidden beneath the floorboards of America's most charming historical homes, waiting for an unsuspecting new owner to uncover them? On a rain-soaked afternoon in late October of 1905, Sheriff Thomas Blackwood of Whispering Pines, Oregon, received an urgent telegram from the Portland Police Department regarding the disappearance of 7 children from neighboring communities over the previous 18 months. The telegram, preserved now in the Oregon State Historical Archives, contained information that would lead to one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in Pacific Northwest history, a case that would remain officially unsolved for over a century. Patterns suggest traveling perpetrator. Stop. Similar. Cases reported in Washington and Northern California. Stop. Suspect may be operating from Whispering Pines area. Stop. Exercise extreme caution. Stop. Whispering Pines, nestled between the dense forests of the Cascade Range and the rugged Oregon coastline, was established in 1867 by lumber baron Silas Thorne. By 1905, the town had grown into a respectable community of nearly 3,000 souls, with a lumber mill, 3 churches, and a newly constructed railway station connecting it to Portland and points beyond. The town prided itself on its safety and close-knit community, with many of its founding families still occupying positions of prominence. Among these families were the Caldwells, owners of the town's only hotel and most impressive residence, a 3-story Victorian mansion that overlooked the town from atop Raven Hill. Jeremiah Caldwell, the family patriarch, had arrived in Whispering Pines in 1875, quickly establishing himself as a businessman of considerable acumen and even greater ambition. His wife, Eleanor, was known for her charitable works and refined sensibilities, having been educated at a prestigious women's college in Massachusetts. The Caldwell children, Victoria, aged 21 in 1905, and twins Edgar and Edwin, aged 16, were fixtures of the town's social scene. Victoria, in particular, was beloved for her work with the town's orphanage, established in 1890 after a devastating influenza epidemic left many children without parents. It was Victoria Caldwell who first discovered what would later become known as the doll-maker's workshop, though at the time she had no idea of the horrors that awaited in the attic of her family home. From her journal dated October 23, 1905, "Today, I ventured into the north attic to retrieve Mother's winter linens. The door, which has always opened freely, was unusually difficult to budge. Inside, I noticed several trunks I had never seen before, positioned beneath the eaves where the ceiling slopes to meet the floor. Most curious was a collection of dolls arranged on a small table, handcrafted figures with porcelain faces and glass eyes that seemed to follow my movements. I cannot explain why, but I felt a profound unease in their presence. I shall ask Father about them at dinner. What Victoria Caldwell couldn't have known was that her discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose a darkness that had been festering at the heart of Whispering Pines for decades. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood, a veteran of the Spanish-American War who had returned to his hometown to serve as its chief law enforcement officer, received Victoria's concerned father at the sheriff's office the following morning. Jeremiah Caldwell, typically the picture of composure, appeared visibly shaken as he recounted his daughter's discovery and his own subsequent investigation of the attic. According to the sheriff's official report, filed on October 24, 1905, Jeremiah Caldwell claimed complete ignorance regarding the trunks and dolls. The attic in question was one of several in the sprawling Caldwell mansion, and he suggested that perhaps the items had been left by the home's previous owners. However, the Caldwells had built the mansion themselves after arriving in Whispering Pines, making this explanation implausible. Sheriff Blackwood already on alert due to the Portland telegram, agreed to examine the attic the same day. What he found there would haunt him for the remainder of his life. The sheriff's personal journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1932, provides a first-hand account of that initial investigation. October 24, 1905, I have witnessed something today that I lack the words to properly describe. The Caldwell attic contained not merely a collection of dolls, but what I can only term a workshop of some demented craftsman. The dolls themselves, 27 in total, are of exceptional craftsmanship, with faces sculpted to show various expressions, primarily of fear and anguish. But it is what I discovered inside one of the trunks that compels me to continue this investigation with the utmost discretion. The first trunk contained various tools, fine carving implements, bottles of paint and varnish, and several jars of what appears to be a preservative solution. The second trunk held fabric swatches, tiny garments, and locks of hair of various colors, each carefully labeled with initials and dates. It was the third trunk that has shaken me to my core. Within it, I found a leather-bound journal containing detailed sketches of each doll, alongside entries that suggest these creations are more than mere toys. The writer speaks of capturing essence and preserving innocence, most disturbing of all. The dates and initials correspond with reported disappearances of children from communities throughout Oregon and neighboring states. I have removed these items for further examination, though I have told Caldwell only that I am investigating a possible break-in. If my suspicions prove correct, we may be dealing with something far more sinister than a mere trespasser. Sheriff Blackwood's discretion proved wise, as the investigation would soon implicate individuals from the town's most prominent families. Within days, he had established a connection between the dates labeled on the hair samples and the disappearances mentioned in the Portland telegram. By October 30th, 1905, Blackwood had reached out to law enforcement officers in 7 different counties across 3 states, compiling a list of 27 missing children over the previous 5 years. The pattern was clear. Each child had vanished without trace from small towns along railway lines connecting to Whispering Pines, with no signs of struggle and no witnesses. The breakthrough in the case came when Blackwood, working late into the night in his office, discovered a hidden compartment in the spine of the leather journal. Within it was a folded sheet of paper containing a list of names, not of the victims, but of town residents. 7 names in total, each a member of Whispering Pines' elite, including Mayor William Hargrove, Dr. Frederick Chambers, and Jeremiah Caldwell himself. From Sheriff Blackwood's official report to the Oregon State Investigator, dated November 2nd, 1905, evidence suggests the existence of a group operating within Whispering Pines, involved in activities of the most abhorrent nature. The dolls appear to be memento mori, crafted to resemble specific children who have disappeared throughout the region. The level of detail in these creations indicates intimate knowledge of the victims that could only be obtained through direct contact. I believe each doll contains organic material from the child it represents. The citizens of Whispering Pines, still unaware of the investigation's true nature, began to notice increased police activity as officers from Portland arrived to assist Sheriff Blackwood. Rumors spread through the town, but few could have imagined the horror that was about to be revealed. On November 5th, 1905, Sheriff Blackwood and 4 Portland officers executed simultaneous arrests of the 7 individuals named in the hidden list. The town's reaction was one of shock and disbelief, as pillars of the community were led away in handcuffs, charged with conspiracy, kidnapping, and murder. The Whispering Pines Gazette, in its November 6th edition, reported only that several prominent citizens have been detained for questioning regarding a matter of grave importance, offering no further details. The editor, Harold Jenkins, would later be revealed as a cousin of Mayor Hargrove, explaining the deliberately vague reporting. What followed was a systematic search of properties owned by the arrested individuals. At Dr. Chambers' medical practice, investigators discovered a hidden basement room containing surgical equipment and several jars of preserved human organs. At Mayor Hargrove's hunting lodge, deep in the surrounding forest, they found a small cemetery containing 16 unmarked graves. Most disturbing of all was what awaited at the Caldwell mansion. Behind a false wall in Jeremiah Caldwell's study, officers discovered a small room containing hundreds of photographs documenting the group's activities over a period of nearly 20 years. The images, too horrific to describe in detail, revealed that the 7 arrested men had been operating as a cult-like organization they called the Preservers of Innocence. From the testimony of Officer James Wilson of the Portland Police, given during the closed trial in December 1905. I've been a police officer for 15 years and served in the Civil War before that. I believed I had seen the worst that mankind could offer, but the photographs we found in Caldwell's home have proven me wrong. These men systematically abducted children, performed unspeakable acts upon them, and then preserved parts of them. The dolls found in the attic were not mere representations. They incorporated actual remains of their victims. The trial, held in Portland to ensure an impartial jury, was closed to the public, with all records sealed by order of the judge. This unusual step was explained as necessary to protect the sensibilities of the public and the dignity of the victims. But later, evidence would suggest a more troubling motivation. Correspondence between the judge, Horace Sullivan, and Governor Theodore Geer, discovered in 1978, indicated that the true reason for the secrecy was the prominence of the families involved and, more disturbingly, the suggestion that the conspiracy extended beyond the 7 men arrested. From Judge Sullivan's letter to Governor Geer, dated December 15, 1905. The matter of the Whispering Pines case has been resolved with as much discretion as possible. All 7 defendants have been found guilty and sentenced accordingly. However, I must express my concern regarding Sheriff Blackwood's continued investigation. He remains convinced that what we have uncovered is merely the Oregon branch of a much larger organization. He has presented evidence suggesting similar cases in at least 5 other states. While I admire his dedication to justice, I fear his pursuit may uncover connections to individuals whose reputations must, for the good of the state, remain untarnished. All 7 men were found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. 6 were hanged on January 10, 1906. The 7th, Dr. Frederick Chambers, died in his cell the night before the execution under circumstances that were never fully explained, though the official report cited heart failure as the cause. Sheriff Blackwood, unsatisfied with what he viewed as a premature conclusion to the case, continued his investigation independently. In February of 1906, he traveled to Sacramento, California, to meet with a detective who had been investigating similar disappearances. 1 week later, he journeyed to Denver, Colorado, where another investigator had uncovered a workshop containing dolls of similar craftsmanship. From a letter Blackwood wrote to his wife, dated February 28, 1906, "I cannot share the details of what I have discovered, even with you, my dear. Know only that the evil we uncovered in our town is but a single tendril of a much larger darkness. I've made connections with like-minded lawmen across the country, and we are piecing together a conspiracy that stretches back at least 40 years and reaches into the highest levels of society. I do not know when I will return home, as each discovery leads to new locations and new horrors. Keep our children close and trust no one." Sheriff Blackwood never returned to Whispering Pines. On March 15, 1906, his body was discovered in a Denver hotel room. The official cause of death was listed as suicide, with reports stating he had shot himself in the head with his service revolver. However, the Denver detective he had been working with, Michael O'Malley, would later claim that Blackwood had been murdered. From Detective O'Malley's personal journal, dated March 16, 1906, "Blackwood is dead. and with him dies our best hope of bringing the full conspiracy to light. I do not for one moment believe he took his own life. The man I spoke with just hours before his death was determined and hopeful. We had established connections between cases in 7 states and identified individuals in positions of considerable influence who appeared to be directing the activities of local groups. Like the one in Whispering Pines, Blackwood had arranged for us to meet with a journalist from the New York Times the following morning. Someone silenced him before he could share what we had learned. The investigation into the preservers of innocence was officially closed following Blackwood's death. Detective O'Malley continued his work privately, but disappeared while traveling through Wyoming in April 1906. His body was never found. In Whispering Pines, life gradually returned to normal. The Caldwell mansion remained empty for several years before being purchased by a lumber company executive who had no connection to the town. The attic where Victoria Caldwell had made her gruesome discovery was sealed off, and that wing of the house remained unused. The town's residents, eager to put the scandal behind them, rarely spoke of the case. Within a generation, it had become something of a forbidden topic, acknowledged only in whispers and cautionary tales told to misbehaving children. Be good, or the doll maker will come for you. The case might have remained buried in history were it not for the curiosity of Eleanor Hayes, a graduate student in criminology who came across a brief mention of the Whispering Pines arrests while researching her dissertation on historical serial killers in 1978. Hayes, determined to uncover the truth, spent months petitioning for access to the sealed court records. When her requests were repeatedly denied, she traveled to Whispering Pines, by then a declining town of just over 1,000 residents, to conduct her own investigation. From Hayes's research notes, dated June 12, 1978. The reluctance of officials to grant access to the court records seems excessive for a case more than 70 years old. Every request is met with bureaucratic obstacles or outright refusals. Even more telling is the reception I've received in Whispering Pines. The current residents, many of them descendants of the original families, are hostile to my inquiries. The town librarian claimed that all local newspapers from 1905 through 1907 were destroyed in a fire in 1920. The current sheriff, Robert Hargrove, great-grandson of Mayor William Hargrove, one of the convicted men, suggested that I'm stirring up trouble and disrespecting the dead. What are these people so determined to hide after all this time? And why does the name Caldwell still evoke such visible discomfort? Hayes's persistence eventually led her to Mabel Wilson, a 92-year-old woman living in a nursing home in Portland, who had been a child in Whispering Pines at the time of the arrests. Mabel, perhaps due to her advanced age and distance from the town, was willing to share memories that others had suppressed. From the recorded interview with Mabel Wilson, conducted on July 3, 1978, I was 8 years old when they took those men away. My mother wouldn't tell me why, but I heard her talking to my father. She said, "It's not just the 7 they caught. The roots go deeper." For weeks afterward, she wouldn't let me play outside alone. Then Sheriff Blackwood died, and suddenly no one would talk about any of it anymore. But the dolls, everyone knew about the dolls. Some said they were still in the attic of the Caldwell house, that you could see them watching from the windows on certain nights. Others said they'd been destroyed, but I never believed that. Things like those dolls, they don't just disappear. When Hayes asked about what had happened to the dolls, Mabel became visibly agitated. They took them as evidence, that's what the adults said. But my cousin Alice, she worked as a maid for Judge Sullivan, she told me different. She said the dolls were sent away to people like them in other places, people in high places who collected such things. She overheard the judge talking on the telephone saying, "The collection will be distributed as agreed." That's when they started watching our house. When we didn't know, just standing across the street at night. My father bought a gun. We moved to Portland the following spring, and he never spoke of Whispering Pines again. Hayes's investigation took an alarming turn when she discovered that several other researchers who had previously attempted to investigate the case had abandoned their work unexpectedly. Dr. Martin Collins of Stanford University had been preparing a book on the case in 1952 when he suddenly accepted a prestigious position in Europe, leaving all his research behind. Journalist Rebecca Chen had been working on a series of articles about historical crimes in Oregon for the Portland Tribune in 1965 when she was killed in what was reported as a hiking accident. From Hayes's journal, dated July 20th, 1978, I can no longer dismiss these as coincidences. Yesterday, I returned to my motel room to find it had been searched. Nothing was taken, but my files had clearly been examined. This morning, the manager informed me that someone claiming to be my brother had asked for a key to my room, saying I had locked myself out. I have no brother. When I went to the local diner for breakfast, conversations stopped when I entered, and I noticed a man I've seen 3 times in different locations over the past week. He was parked outside my motel when I left and followed me to the library. I've called Professor Jameson and asked him to secure all copies of my research notes. If anything happens to me, at least the truth won't die with me. 2 days later, Hayes left Whispering Pines abruptly, abandoning her investigation. She returned to the University of Washington, where she changed the topic of her dissertation and never publicly discussed the Whispering Pines case again. However, she secretly compiled her research into a manuscript that she entrusted to her faculty advisor with instructions that it not be opened until after her death. Eleanor Hayes died of cancer in 1994. The sealed envelope containing her manuscript was opened according to her wishes, revealing not only her findings but also a letter explaining her sudden departure from Whispering Pines. I left because I was shown what happens to those who dig too deeply into this case. A woman approached me in the parking lot of my motel, Victoria Caldwell's granddaughter, now elderly herself. She showed me photographs, recent photographs, of dolls identical in craftsmanship to those described in the 1905 case. She told me that the preservers still exist, that they never stopped their work, and that they would destroy me and everyone I love if I continued my investigation. She said, "This isn't just about Whispering Pines. Their members include judges, politicians, police chiefs, and businessmen across the country." I believed her. I still do. Hayes's manuscript, along with copies of her research notes, photographs and recorded interviews, was published as The Doll Makers, America's Hidden History of Ritual Murder in 1995. The book received little attention and quickly went out of print, with many attributing its disturbing claims to an overwrought imagination rather than factual research. The Caldwell mansion, which had changed hands numerous times over the decades, was purchased in 2003 by the Whispering Pines Historical Society, with plans to renovate it as a museum celebrating the town's lumber industry heritage. During the renovation, construction workers made a discovery that would finally bring the century-old case back into the light. From the report filed by construction foreman David Miller on May 10, 2003, while removing damaged wall panels in the north attic, my crew discovered a hidden space between the outer wall and an interior partition. The space contained a small, child-sized chair, various tools similar to those used by doll makers or taxidermists, and most disturbingly, a collection of small cloth pouches. Each pouch contained what appears to be human teeth and locks of hair. We immediately stopped work and contacted the police. The sealed records of the 1905 case were finally opened as part of the new investigation. Modern forensic techniques, including DNA analysis, were applied to the evidence discovered in the attic and compared with the original case materials that had been stored in state archives. The results confirmed what Eleanor Hayes and others had suspected. The 7 men arrested in 1905 were indeed guilty of the crimes for which they were executed, but they represented only a small part of a much larger organization. DNA from the hair samples matched missing children from cases spanning more than a century, with the most recent dating to 1998, a 7-year-old girl who had disappeared. From a small town less than 30 miles from Whispering Pines, most shocking of all was the discovery of a list hidden within the chair found in the secret attic space. The list contained names of chapters located in 37 states, along with the initials of chapter masters and dates of ascension ranging from 1865 to 2000. The FBI established Task Force Innocence in June 2003 to investigate these findings, and in the years that followed, arrests were made in 17 states. Many of the individuals taken into custody were, as Victoria Caldwell's granddaughter had claimed to Eleanor Hayes, people in positions of considerable influence and authority. However, the full extent of the Preservers of Innocence network remains unknown. For every arrest made, evidence suggests that others have gone deeper into hiding, destroying records and eliminating witnesses. The dolls themselves, the macabre trophies that first exposed this dark conspiracy, continue to surface in estate sales, private auctions, and the collections of wealthy individuals who claim ignorance of their true origin. In 2023, an anonymous whistleblower claiming to be a former member of the organization released documents suggesting that the preservers had evolved over time, adapting their methods to avoid detection while continuing their fundamental practices. According to these documents, the group now operates through seemingly legitimate businesses, charitable foundations, and even online communities, identifying potential victims and recruits through sophisticated algorithms and encrypted communications. From the whistleblower's statement, posted to a secure server and subsequently shared by journalists worldwide, they believe they are preserving something pure and precious, something they think is being lost in the modern world. Their methods have changed, but their purpose has not. The dolls are still being made, children are still disappearing, and those who seek to expose them still face the same fate as Sheriff Blackwood. I'm sharing this information knowing it will likely cost me my life, but someone must stand against what has festered in the shadows for too long. The individual who released this statement has not been identified, and attempts to trace the source of the documents have been unsuccessful. Within weeks of their release, key pieces of evidence cited in the documents began to disappear from police evidence rooms, government archives, and digital repositories. The town of Whispering Pines, which had begun to attract dark tourism following the revelations of 2003, has once again closed ranks against outside inquiry. The Caldwell Mansion, rather than becoming a museum, was demolished in 2005 after a series of unexplained fires damaged the structure. Today, little remains to mark the site where Victoria Caldwell made her disturbing discovery more than a century ago. A small park now occupies the land where the mansion once stood, with no plaque or marker to indicate its history. The town's current residents, many of them newcomers attracted by affordable real estate prices and the natural beauty of the area, know nothing of the darkness that once thrived there. But in the surrounding communities, parents still warn their children not to wander too far alone. The specific reason for this caution may have been forgotten or deliberately obscured, transformed into a generic fear of the woods or strangers. But its origin lies in the very real horrors uncovered in the attic of the Caldwell Mansion. And somewhere, perhaps closer than we dare imagine, new dolls are being crafted with the same meticulous attention to detail, their glass eyes reflecting the same unspeakable truth that the work of the Preservers of Innocence continues. Have you ever considered how a single object, seemingly innocent, can connect decades of darkness across generations? What if that object was watching you even now, preserving your essence for someone's private collection? The investigation into the Whispering Pines case took an unexpected turn in April of 2004, when retired Detective Marcus Reynolds, who had been part of the original FBI Task Force Innocence, received a package containing a single porcelain doll and a handwritten note that simply read, "They're watching you." Reynolds, who had retired to a small coastal town in Maine following the dissolution of the task force, immediately contacted his former colleagues. From the official FBI report dated April 17th, 2004, the doll received by former Detective Reynolds bears striking similarities to those recovered from the Caldwell mansion in 2003. Forensic analysis confirms that the doll contains organic material, specifically hair that matches the DNA profile of Lily Summers, an 8-year-old who disappeared from Bellingham, Washington in 1996. This case was previously linked to the Preservers organization. The timing of this delivery, exactly 1 year after the task force was officially disbanded, suggests a deliberate message from individuals connected to the organization. Reynolds, who had dedicated the final years of his career to understanding the structure and methodology of the Preservers, had compiled extensive notes on their activities dating back to the mid-19th century. His research, much of which remained classified, suggested that the organization had its origins in post-Civil War America, emerging from a network of wealthy individuals who shared both occult interests and a disturbing philosophy regarding the preservation of innocence. From Reynolds' personal journal, recovered after his disappearance in June 2004, I believe I've identified the founder, Augustus Thorne, a Massachusetts industrialist whose considerable fortune was built on textile mills, employing child labor. Thorne traveled extensively in Europe during the 1850s, developing an interest in both taxidermy and spirit photography. Upon his return to America in 1862, he established the Society for the Preservation of Innocence, ostensibly a charitable organization focused on the welfare of orphaned children. The Society's public activities included funding orphanages and schools, while its private purpose was altogether more sinister. Thorne appears to have developed the belief that the essence or spirit of a child could be captured and preserved through a specific ritual process, resulting in the creation of a doll that served as a vessel for this essence. His early journals, portions of which I've accessed through his great-granddaughter's estate, contain disturbing references to securing vessels and the perfection of the preservation technique. What's most troubling is the connection I've discovered between Thorne and Silas Thorne, the founder of Whispering Pines, Oregon. They were cousins, and correspondence between them suggests that Silas established the town specifically to provide a remote location for certain society activities. Reynolds' investigation into the Thorne connection led him to identify several other founding members of the society, including prominent families whose descendants continued to occupy positions of influence across the country. Most disturbing was his discovery of the society's symbol, a stylized porcelain doll with outstretched arms hidden within the corporate logos of several major companies and charitable foundations still operating today. 2 weeks after receiving the porcelain doll, Reynolds disappeared from his home in Maine. His research notes, computer, and the doll itself were missing, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. The official investigation concluded that Reynolds had left voluntarily, possibly due to declining mental health, though his colleagues vehemently rejected this explanation. From the statement of former FBI agent Sarah Chen, given to local police on June 5, 2004. Marcus was not delusional or paranoid. Everything he uncovered about the Preservers was meticulously documented and cross-referenced. He had recently told me he was close to identifying current members in at least 3 state governments and several major corporations. His disappearance is not a coincidence or a mental health crisis. It's a continuation of the pattern we've observed with others who've gotten too close to exposing this organization. Reynolds was never found, and the investigation into his disappearance was officially closed in 2007. classified as a missing person case likely to remain unsolved. The story of the Whispering Pines dolls might have faded into obscurity once again, were it not for the persistence of true crime podcaster Jamie Collins, who began researching the case for a series titled The Doll Makers in 2019. Collins, fascinated by both the historical aspects of the case and its contemporary implications, traveled to several locations connected to the preservers, including the site of the former Caldwell Mansion in Whispering Pines. From the transcript of The Doll Makers podcast, Episode 3, I'm standing now in the park that was built where the Caldwell Mansion once stood. It's a beautiful, peaceful place that gives no indication of the horrors that were once concealed here. The current residents of Whispering Pines seem genuinely unaware of their town's dark history. When I mentioned the Caldwell case to the woman running the local cafe, she looked confused and said she'd never heard of it. But there's something unsettling about this calculated forgetting. The town's historical society has no records of the case, despite its national significance. The local newspaper archives from that period are mysteriously missing. It's as if the town itself has been scrubbed clean of any connection to the preservers. What's even more disturbing is what I found when I started looking into property records for the surrounding area. Several large parcels of land within a 20-mile radius of Whispering Pines are owned by shell companies that trace back to a single private foundation, the Thorne Heritage Foundation, established in 1923 by descendants of Silas Thorne. Collins's investigation led her to Victoria Hayes, the daughter of Eleanor Hayes, who had inherited her mother's complete research on the case, including materials that had never been published. Victoria, initially reluctant to revisit what she described as the obsession that consumed my mother's life, eventually agreed to share what she knew. From Victoria Hayes's interview on the Doll Makers podcast, Episode 5, my mother never really stopped investigating, even after she officially abandoned her dissertation. She continued gathering information in secret for decades, building a network of contacts who had their own pieces of the puzzle. What she uncovered was that the preservers aren't just a historical curiosity or even a traditional criminal organization. They're something much more insidious. She believed they had evolved into what she called a shadow infrastructure, operating within legitimate institutions. Their members don't advertise their affiliation. Many may not even know the full extent of the organization they serve. But they recognize certain symbols, respond to certain cues, and work together to protect their shared interests. The dolls themselves have become valuable collector's items, traded among the elite members as symbols of status. My mother traced several of the original Whispering Pines dolls to private collections in New York, London, and Tokyo. The collectors all claim to be interested in the dolls purely as historical artifacts or examples of folk art. But their connections to each other and to institutions linked to the preservers suggest otherwise. Victoria Hayes provided Collins with access to her mother's complete archives, including correspondence with other researchers who had investigated aspects of the preservers over the decades. This network of researchers, operating independently but sharing information through carefully encrypted channels, had compiled evidence suggesting that the organization had been responsible for the disappearances of at least 600 children across North America between 1865 and 2020. From Eleanor Hayes's unpublished notes dated January 1993, I've identified a pattern in the disappearances. They occur in clusters, usually in small communities experiencing economic growth or development. A child vanishes every few months for a year or two, then the disappearances stop completely. 20 or 30 years later, when most residents who would remember the original cases have died or moved away, the pattern begins again in the same community. Whispering Pines follows this pattern perfectly. After the arrests in 1905, no children disappeared from the town until the 1930s, when 5 children vanished over an 18-month period. The cases were never solved. Then in the 1960s, another cluster of disappearances. Each time, the investigation went nowhere, and the community eventually stopped talking about the cases. Most disturbing is the correlation I've found between these clusters and the establishment of new chapters of the Preservers. Each series of disappearances appears to coincide with an initiation period for new members. The dolls aren't just trophies, they're proof of commitment to the organization's principles and practices. Colin's podcast gained unexpected traction, attracting millions of listeners and bringing renewed attention to both the historical case and the possibility that the Preservers continue to operate in the present day. As the podcast's popularity grew, Collins began receiving tips from listeners across the country, many claiming to have information about the organization or to have seen dolls matching the description of those from the Caldwell mansion. Most of these tips proved to be dead ends or hoaxes, but one led Collins to a startling discovery. A listener who identified herself only as former curator provided coordinates to a location in the woods outside Whispering Pines. There, buried beneath a recently fallen tree, Collins found a metal box containing photographs of dolls arranged in a ceremonial circle, along with documents detailing what appeared to be an initiation ritual conducted in 1978. From the Dollmakers podcast, Episode 7, the documents I found describe something called the Gathering of Vessels, which seems to be a ceremony held every 25 years to induct new members into the inner circle of the Preservers. The most recent one mentioned in these papers took place in 2003, coincidentally, or perhaps not, the same year that the Caldwell Mansion investigation was reopened. What's truly chilling is the list of attendees at the 1978 ceremony. I can't share the names for legal reasons, but I've been able to verify that at least 3 of the individuals listed went on to hold significant public offices, including a federal judgeship and 2 congressional seats. Another became the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, and yet another served as the director of a child welfare organization for more than a decade. These weren't fringe figures operating in the shadows. They were respected, powerful individuals hiding in plain sight. And if the pattern held true for the 2003 ceremony, then some of the current leaders in our government, businesses, and institutions may be affiliated with the Preservers. Following the release of this episode, Collins reported receiving threatening messages and noticing suspicious vehicles outside her apartment. She installed security cameras and informed both local police and her podcast network of the situation. Despite the threats, she continued her investigation, focusing on tracing the current ownership of the Thorn Heritage Foundation and its connections to other organizations. From Collins' notes dated March 15th, 2020, the foundation operates primarily through grants to arts organizations, historical preservation societies, and children's charities. On the surface, its activities appear benevolent, but I've identified a pattern in its grant recipients. Many are located in communities that have experienced clusters of child disappearances in the years following their receipt of Thorn funding. The current board of directors includes descendants of several families identified in Eleanor Hayes's research as having historical connections to the Preservers, though none bear the Thorn or Caldwell names. The foundation's symbol, which they describe as a stylized representation of a child reaching for knowledge, bears an unmistakable resemblance to the doll symbol identified by Detective Reynolds. Collins was in the process of producing the final episode of her podcast series when she received an unexpected email from someone claiming to be Victoria Caldwell's great-granddaughter. The email contained a single image, a photograph of a door with the symbol of the Preservers carved into its frame, and an address in Portland, Oregon. Against the advice of her producers and colleagues, Collins traveled to Portland to investigate the lead. She arrived at the address, an antiquarian bookshop in a historic district of the city, on April 23, 2020. Security camera footage from a neighboring business shows her entering the shop at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon. She was never seen leaving. Portland police, alerted by Collins' podcast producer when she failed to check in that evening, found the bookshop closed and apparently abandoned, though it had been in business for over 20 years. The owner, Arthur Chambers, a name that appeared in Hayes's research as a possible descendant of Dr. Frederick Chambers, one of the original Whispering Pines 7, had disappeared, along with all business records and any evidence that Collins had ever been there. The investigation into Collins' disappearance remains open, but few leads have emerged. Her podcast, which had been scheduled to conclude with a live-streamed final episode, revealing what she described as conclusive evidence of the preserver's current operations, instead ended with a statement from her producer explaining the circumstances of her disappearance and urging listeners to pressure law enforcement to continue the investigation. In a disturbing epilogue to Collins' story, packages containing dolls resembling those described in the original Whispering Pines case began arriving at the homes and offices of several journalists and law enforcement officers who had expressed interest in pursuing the investigation. Each doll was accompanied by a note reading simply, "The work continues." FBI analysis confirmed that these new dolls contained organic material, specifically hair, but could not determine its origin due to degradation of the DNA. The dolls themselves were professional crafted, with hand-painted porcelain faces and glass eyes that, according to one recipient, seemed to follow you around the room. From the statement of journalist Michael Torres, who received one such doll in June 2020, I understood immediately that it was a warning. The doll had red hair, just like my 7-year-old daughter. The clothes it wore resembled her favorite dress. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a specific threat against my family. I've stopped my investigation into the Collins disappearance, and I've moved my family to a location I haven't disclosed to anyone. I don't believe this is over, but I can't put my daughter at risk. The doll phenomenon spread beyond those directly connected to the investigation, with reports of similar dolls appearing in antique shops, online auctions, and estate sales across the country. Some bore makers' marks, identifying them as products of Thorn Creations, a company that has no public records or known business registration. In October 2022, an anonymous source provided the Washington Post with documents allegedly obtained from the internal servers of the Thorn Heritage Foundation. These documents included financial records showing transfers of funds to offshore accounts linked to known human trafficking networks, as well as encrypted communications between board members discussing acquisition, targets, and vessel preparation, while the Foundation issued a statement denouncing the documents as forgeries and threatening legal action against any outlet that published them. Independent verification confirmed that at least some of the information contained in the leak was accurate. This included details about properties owned by the Foundation that had never been publicly disclosed, as well as connections to other organizations previously identified in Hayes's and Reynolds' research. From the Washington Post article published October 12, 2022, the documents paint a disturbing picture of an organization that has operated for generations beneath a veneer of respectability, using its influence and resources to protect its members and continue practices that began in a small Oregon town more than a century ago. While we cannot verify all of the claims made in these documents, our investigation has confirmed key details that support the broader narrative they present. Most concerning are the references to The Gathering, scheduled for 2028, described as the largest convergence in our history, and expected to include representatives from all 48 chapters. The location of this event is not specified, But several properties owned by the foundation or its affiliates are mentioned as possible venues, including a compound in rural Montana and an estate in upstate New York. Following the publication of this article, several journalists involved in the investigation reported break-ins at their homes and offices. The lead reporter, Rebecca Johnson, discovered all of her research materials missing and a porcelain doll placed on her desk chair. She took an indefinite leave of absence from the newspaper shortly thereafter. The FBI, responding to mounting public pressure, established a new task force in January 2023 to investigate the allegations against the Thorn Heritage Foundation and its potential connection to historical and contemporary child disappearances. However, the task force was disbanded just 6 months later, with officials citing reallocation of resources as the reason. From an interview with former FBI agent Thomas Wilson, who served briefly on the task force, given to an independent news outlet in December 2023, we were shut down just as we were beginning to make progress. We had identified financial connections between the foundation and shell companies used to purchase properties near locations where children had disappeared. We had traced communications between board members and individuals in law enforcement who had compromised previous investigations. We were building a solid case. Then suddenly, orders came down from the highest levels to redirect our resources to other priorities. Evidence we had gathered was reclassified or simply disappeared from our files. Team members were reassigned to offices across the country. It was a deliberate dismantling of an investigation that threatened to expose something powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Today, the case remains in a state of limbo, neither fully investigated nor completely forgotten. Online communities dedicated to researching the preservers continue to compile evidence and share theories, though many report that their forums and websites are regularly hacked or shut down. Journalists who have attempted to pick up where Collins and the Washington Post left off have encountered similar obstacles and threats. The town of Whispering Pines has seen its population decline steadily in recent years, with many residents selling their homes to a development company that, public records reveal, is owned by a subsidiary of the Thorn Heritage Foundation. Plans for the community include a historical theme park, celebrating the town's lumber industry heritage, with no mention of the Caldwell case or its aftermath. The dolls themselves continue to surface periodically, appearing in unexpected places and vanishing just as quickly. Collectors report being approached by anonymous sellers offering authentic preserver dolls for prices reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Museums and academic institutions that have attempted to acquire these artifacts for study report that their requests are denied or that the items disappear before transactions can be completed. From the Journal of Dr. Eliza Montgomery, curator of the American Folk Art Museum, dated February 3, 2024, I was contacted today by someone claiming to possess one of the original dolls from the Caldwell mansion. They offered to donate it to our collection on the condition that it be displayed with a specific accompanying text and never subjected to any form of analysis or examination. When I explained that we could not accept such conditions, they seemed unsurprised and ended the call abruptly. An hour later, I received an email containing a photograph of my daughter walking home from school, alongside an image of a doll that bore a disturbing resemblance to her. The message read only, "Reconsider our offer. I've contacted the police, but I fear they won't be able to help. The network behind these dolls has evaded justice for more than a century. What chance do I have against such an entrenched and powerful entity?" As night falls over the former site of the Caldwell Mansion, the park that now occupies the space appears peaceful and ordinary. Children play on swings and slides where once stood the attic that concealed unimaginable horrors. Families spread picnic blankets on grass growing over ground that may still hold secrets buried deep beneath the surface. And somewhere, in private collections and hidden workshops across the country, glass eyes watch and wait, bearing witness to a darkness that has never truly been extinguished. The dolls of Whispering Pines continue their silent vigil, preserving not just the essence of their victims, but the terrible truth of an organization whose work remains unfinished.